What is going on, gunfighters? Welcome back to Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting the right way with God at the center and real-world, first-hand experience. Today we're going to be talking about other AR calibers other than 5.56. You know, a lot of people have ARs. A lot of people have Glock 19s. You know what a lot of people don't have? Gunfighting mugs. But you can. You can get one at goodshepherdtraining.com. Really cool metal enamel mugs. They say gunfighter fuel on them. They're so new, even I don't have one yet, but I do have one of the Alpha Male mugs. Same cup, different design. It's a good cup. You'll find that and some other gunfighting merchandise at goodshepherdtraining.com. With that, I think I'll put the bio in this one and the end of the episode, so we can get into the topic without it taking forever. If you want to listen to the bio, if you haven't heard it before, it'll be at the end. If you want to turn it off when we get to the bio, you can just turn it off. I will say first and foremost, I am a Christian. That is central, period. God is number one, period. I hope that shows in everything that I do, and this podcast is no different. With that, let's talk about some alternate AR calibers. And this is by no means going to be an all-inclusive list. Now, this is something that came up recently in a Patreon chat. Alternate AR calibers. If you want to be part of those chats, you can become a patron. There should be a link in the show notes. Anyway, this came up as a chat, and I thought it would be a good episode. No, I don't think this is going to happen, but let's just say, theoretically, next week, the government, like other governments have done, banned you owning a military caliber. You could not any longer own 5.56. 5.56 and 223, let's just call them for the sake of this. I know they're not, but for this, let's say those you cannot own anymore. You cannot have them. 5.56, 223 is no longer a thing. You have to convert your ARs to another caliber. Or let's just say you have a specialty AR. That's kind of why these things exist now. You have an AR that you want to use for hog hunting, and you want something a little bit bigger. You have an AR that you want for going through an engine block. Whatever. So what are some really cool alternate AR calibers? Well, I asked this in the chat, and the number one thing that came up, the very first one, is 22 long rifle. That's awesome. That I was not at all what I was thinking, but that is probably the most popular and the most fired caliber that goes into an AR other than 5.56 is a 22 long rifle for good reason. That is a great choice, especially great if you want to train and be good on your AR without spending a lot of money in 5.56 ammo. You can shoot a lot more 22 long rifle ammo. That's a great choice, good for small game hunting, just like it would be in any other gun. Certainly hunt small game with an AR in 22. You can also, if you don't know, just get the bolt conversions. You can literally use your same upper and everything. I'd much rather go with a dedicated upper, but you could just buy the bolt conversion kit and shoot 22 long rifle out of a regular AR with different mags and the actual bolt conversion. So very minimal that you have to do there. 22 long rifle is awesome. For all the reasons it's awesome in other platforms, it's awesome in an AR platform. And that was the very first alternate caliber that was talked about, and that's awesome. Now, I'll stipulate this by saying these are what we're going to talk about today, calibers that will fit into a regular standard AR-15 lower receiver. Obviously, you can go AR-10 in that route, but that's a whole different discussion. Talking about kind of alternate rounds that were designed to fit into an AR. The next one is my personal favorite, and sadly, kind of a dead caliber. Now, I don't own one. But I think if you're going to use an AR for medium-sized game hunting, it is the best, although it never caught on. I don't know if it's because it's a Remington cartridge and it came out when Remington was going through a lot of trouble, a lot of turmoil, having some financial issues. But all that aside, it's a good caliber, especially when you look at the ballistics on paper. And that is the 30 AR. The 30 AR is an awesome caliber, and not quite a 308. It is, as they say colloquially, within spitting distance of a 308 in a regular 5.56 size AR. Let me break out the often quoted Hornady reloading manual and see what it says about the 30 AR. Now the 30 Remington AR is shooting in this reloading manual anyway, 110 grains at 3,000 feet a second, 30 caliber projectile. It's shooting a 150 to 155 grain, which is probably the most common 308 caliber projectile for medium game, at 2,600 feet a second. And this is not even a hot load. This is a published load. It's at the upper end of their published data. 2,600 feet a second with a 150 grain bullet out of an AR. That's a 150 grain bullet at 2,600 feet a second. Now, how does that compare with the obvious comparison, the most popular, by far probably, 30 caliber AR alternate caliber, the 300 Blackout? Well, I looked up a published load for it, not in my Hornady reloading manual because it doesn't have one, but a Hornady load, like a factory load, is shooting 150 grain at 2,000 feet a second, which, to be honest, is much more than I thought it was going to be, but that is by no means even in the same ballpark as 2,600 feet a second. 2,600 feet a second is more a traditional hunting 30 caliber round. That's much, much closer to 308 than 300 Blackout is to 30 AR by quite a bit. So let's talk about the 300 Blackout. That's a good transition, as the 30 AR is kind of in obscurity. The 300 Blackout, to be fair, was not designed as a medium game hunting round. Why does it exist? It exists primarily as a suppressed round. I know some people are going to get mad about this, but you're basically turning your, as far as foot-pounds and data on a page go, turning your AR into a 45 ACP big pistol. Not really, but that gives you an idea of the ballistics. To be fair, different ballistics coefficient, different sectional density, but a real common load in that is, let's say, a 220 grain bullet in your subsonic 300 Blackout, whereas a traditional load from a 45 ACP is already subsonic and a 230 grain. So 220 grain versus 230 grain, and the velocity is going to be roughly the same. It's going to have to be, if it's subsonic, just below the sound barrier. So let's say, to keep the number simple, I know it's not exact and it changes with elevation and the thickness of the air and all kinds of things, but the speed of sound, generally 1,000 feet a second, which is about what your 230 grain 45 ACP is doing. That's why that round exists. And to be fair, it's probably the best round for suppressing an AR. You can obviously load it with lighter bullets. We just talked about a 115 grain, but probably more common is 110 grain. One of the big advantages of this is it's basically the parent case of a 5.56. So all your standard stuff is going to work. Your magazines are going to work, should have the same magazine capacity. Basically, you're just cutting off, this is not how you make the ammo, but I'm saying to picture it. You cut off the front of the 5.56 case after it's been fired, and you shove a bullet almost as big as the case into it to make it a 30 caliber, and you get a 300 Blackout. Again, you can load it with the 220s or the 110s. Those are probably the most common. Velocities are going to vary, but this lists the velocity of the 110 that I just looked up. The first thing that popped up was 2,400 feet a second with a 110 grain bullet. And another common loading, I think, would be the 120-something-ish grains. I just looked up 125 because it's right in the middle, and you're going to be right there at about 2,200 feet a second, which gives us a good, easy transition into another real popular caliber, and its main rival in the AK, which is a 7.62 by 39. I really like the 7.62 by 39. It is probably the first massively issued, I know the Germans had 8 Kurz, but I'm talking about like massively issued to an entire army, intermediate cartridge. It is fantastic. Nobody can argue that it's effective. It's probably almost certainly been used in more continents and more conflicts and by more people than any other cartridge in the 20th century and going into the 21st century for warfare. 7.62 by 39, the AK round, the SKS round. You can get ARs chambered in that. There's an issue, though, in that we talked about the 300 Blackout taking the same basic parent case, which gets rid of a lot of the engineering problems. You can get 7.62-39 in an AR, but you have to really go chintzy on the bolt face, which can cause problems. Also, it's different case dimensions, different magazines, all that can introduce problems. If you know anything about gunfighting in semi-automatics or automatics, magazines are a big part of reliability. And we've gotten so good at making reliable AR mags, the P mags, the Amend 2 mags, the Lancer mags. They're all good mags. And they have a lot of iterations, a lot of generations. I don't even know what generation we're at on the P mag. But you're not going to get that with 7.62-39 mags. Or with the bolts. Again, all that's got to be different because it's a different parent case. But you can get them in an AR. And again, velocities are going to vary. They can vary from day to day, gun to gun. But let's say for argument's sake, the most popular loading for 7.62-39 is 123 grain, so pretty close to that 125 grain. And the standard velocity, let's say in the ballpark of 2350. So although I think 7.62-39 is a better cartridge, I think in an AR, I would probably, if I had to pick one of those two, which I would pick a lot of other stuff first, if I had to pick one of those two, I would pick the 300 Blackout, just because you are more likely to get a reliable gun. Now, there could be exceptions. You could have a fantastically reliable 7.62-39 AR. But I think in general, because you're messing with less moving parts, and one of the reasons the AR is so reliable today is it's gone through so many decades of improvement and you know all the specs on it, and you get a lot farther away from that when you go to a 7.62-39 AR. You keep a lot of that, not all of it, but a lot of it when you stick with 300 Blackout. So if I had to pick between those two, I'd give up the better terminal performance and ballistics of the 7.62-39 for the 300 Blackout, even though I think 7.62-39 is a better cartridge. If I was going to get one of those rifles, and I've had one in the past, I would get a Galil Ace in 7.62-39 because it's engineered off an AK, which is made, again, designed originally with that cartridge. You don't have a bunch of engineering hurdles with that. Anyway, let's move on to some other real popular ones. And this next one will probably be my go-to for medium-sized game hunting. Although I love the 30 AR, it's so obscure. Unless you reload and have a bunch of brass for it, although it's way better ballistically, it's probably not as practical as a 6.8 SPC. Now, 6.8 SPC was the next big military cartridge that wasn't. They wanted it to win contracts. They wanted the military to go to it, and they never did. At least not in any big numbers. There may have been some experimental units and stuff that used it, but 6.8 SPC is kind of more firepower in that AR, and it's, unlike the 300 Blackout, a better, longer, medium, let's call it a medium range, medium game cartridge. I think that's where it shines. I understand, or I've heard is a better term because I don't know firsthand, that it has quite a following in Texas and things like that with hogs, because it's a good medium-sized game round. Give credit where credit is due. I'm going to read briefly from the Hornady Reloading Manual. The 6.8 SPC has a very interesting pedigree, originally developed at the request and in conjunction with the 5th Special Forces Group of the United States Army. The 6.8mm SPC is designed to deliver more lethality from the AR-15 platform than the standard 5.56x45 NATO currently delivers. End of reading from the Hornady Reloading Manual. But that's just some stuff on a page. What are some actual numbers here? It's launching a 100 grain bullet, which I like, out of that caliber. This is not a 30 caliber, it's 6.8, or more accurately a .277, which you may be familiar with in the brand new cartridge. They actually did adopt the .277 Fury, which will not fit into a standard AR, but it's .277 caliber, the same caliber as your good old .270 Winchester. It's a .277 caliber bullet, and it launches 100 grains at 2,600 feet a second. Now, again, not as good as your 30 AR, because that's launching a 150 grain bullet. 50% more bullet mass at the same velocity, at least listed here on these pages. But it's a 100 grain bullet at 2,600 feet a second, which, to be fair, is quite a bit more, in my opinion, than the 5.56. And a 130 grain bullet, which is probably your most quintessential 277, 270 caliber kind of grain weight. It's launching those at 2,300 feet a second. So it is not a 270. But I think it achieved its goal of being a bigger step up in firepower and lethal, let's call it terminal performance, than the 5.56. Which is an easy transition into the next cartridge we're going to talk about, and probably the one that one gets pinned against the most, the 6.5Grendel. Now, I'm not going to read you verbatim what it says in the Hornady Reloading Manual about this cartridge, other than to say it says it's perhaps the most efficient cartridge chambered in an AR platform. I would say that it probably is the most efficient, and I like efficiency. I'm big on that. 6.5Grendel, as the name implies, is 6.5 millimeter projectile, or 260 generally if you're talking about traditional standard measurement, which you'll be familiar with likely from the 6.5 Creedmoor, 6.5 PRC, the good old 6.5 by 55 Swede. It's been around since the 1800s. That's awesome. Known for being a very effective, very good performer, especially at distance, the 6.5Grendel is a little baby version of that. Think of it like the 6.5 Creedmoor's little brother. And it is based on the PPC cartridges. And I'll be honest, I don't know that much about them. I'm not an AR-15 engineer. I don't know if this is like chambering an AR in 7.62 by 39. I don't know if it's a totally different bolt. I don't know if it's a totally different magazine. I don't know that. And I'm not going to spend the time to look it up, or this episode would be very long and tedious. If you want one, I would say look into it for yourself. But I don't know how much engineering goes into it. But if the gun ran well and it didn't have a bunch of engineering hurdles, I'd say this would be a good choice, and I would probably pick it over the 6.8 SPC. We started out with a 100-grain bullet on the 6.8. We got a 100-grain bullet here at 2550. So 50 feet a second difference, basically the same. But again, you're getting a higher BC with this than a 277 because it's the same grain bullet. Unless it's a horrible design, the same grain bullet and a smaller caliber is going to give you a longer, sleeker bullet. And it lists a 129 grain at 2250. Not a screaming velocity, not a super heavy bullet, but it's good ballistically, and again, it's meant to be efficient and do well downrange at distance. Shooting well, I think a lot of people misunderstand, shooting well at long distances in the last, let's say, 20 years, yeah, that's probably about the right. 20 years is not really about flat shooting cartridges. If you look at the 6.5 Creedmoor, it's not really a flat shooting cartridge. It's about being predictable, being able to buck the wind well. Being predictable is far more important because you have a laser rangefinder if you're shooting any kind of long distance, which I don't really like to shoot with computers. That's just me, but it's kind of the new hot trend. But if you know that your bullet is going to drop exactly this many inches at 1,000 yards, it doesn't matter if that exact number really is 40 or 30 or 50 inches, as long as it's predictable and you can shoot it well. Different if you do the kind of hunting that I like to do, like spot and stalk hunting, where you want a good point blank range cartridge where I can pretty much do point of aim, point of impact out to, let's say, 275, maybe 300 yards. But anyway, this is a good, efficient cartridge, and although I don't think I'd ever want one for like long range shooting, I think it would be a fine medium game caliber. I think this one or the 6.8 would probably be the most practical choice. Again, engineering aside, I'm not sure about the engineering on this cartridge and how close it aligns with a 5.56, or if it's a totally different thing. I'm not sure about that. If it has like a rebated rim to allow easier bolt, transitions, I don't really know about that. But I do know on paper it looks like a really good ballistically effective cartridge. And I really do like the 6.5 caliber. Now, you might be saying, quit messing around with these little weak calibers in the AR and let's get serious. And the people that think like that generally think of three calibers that I'm aware of. The 450 Bushmaster, the 458 SOCOM, and the 50 Beowulf. These are all really big, in my opinion, kind of obnoxious calibers. I have known people that have had them and shot them and liked them. I I really have no desire to do that. Again, we talked about if you want something to stop an engine block in an AR, I would say move up to a bigger rifle. But if you want it in an AR, I would say get like a 4.58 SOCOM with a solid copper projectile. That wouldn't be a bad choice. I'd say probably a more practical and better choice would just be a pump shotgun with a slug. But the people that love ARs and want a big caliber AR would say go with this. If you want just a really big one, the same people that like Desert Eagles and 50 cal, not a practical gun really for anything. Some people just like to shoot them, and that's fine. If you want that kind of thing in an AR, you're going to get the 50 Beowulf. Probably. You're like, why would I go with 45 when I could go with 50? If it's just a range toy to throw big bullets down range, why not go with the biggest you can, which and I believe is the 50 Beowulf. Just for fun, I looked it up in the reloading manual, and it launches a 500 grain bullet at 1400 feet a second. The 50 Beowulf does. Will that kill a deer? Certainly it will kill a deer. But far less practical, I think, than like a 6.8 or a 6.5Grendel. Maybe your idea of the zombie apocalypse are zombie moose. Maybe you live in Maine or the UP and you think zombie moose is going to be the way the world ends. Well, then a 50 Beowulf might be for you, friend. Other than that, I kind of see them as just kind of fun at the range, just fun to have. Another one I'll mention, it's been big the last, I'd say, year or two or maybe 3. The 350 Legend doesn't really apply to me. I don't live anywhere where you're restricted to shoot a straight-walled cartridge, but it's generally designed to be like a cartridge that I always liked and always have liked. I've talked about before, the 35 Remington. It's been around since the early 1900s. 35 Remington is great in a Marlin 336 or lever gun. This basically makes your AR kind of like that. It's very ballistically similar from what I understand to a 35 Remington, which I like. And you can put that in an AR platform, basically turning it into a 35 caliber hunting cartridge. If you live in a place where your hunting ability to hunt with a rifle has been restricted to a straight wall cartridge, maybe that's a good option for you. Even if it was me, I would probably, if it's for hunting, I'd pick a nice classic Marlin 336 and 35 Remington, I think, if you offered me one or the other. But that's just me. That cartridge is out there, and it's probably popular for good reason. It might be the best choice if you do live in a state that requires a straight wall cartridge, and caveat, you want to hunt with an AR. Probably a lot of other really good or better choices that are straight wall cartridges, but they don't really fit in an AR well. So I know there are a lot of others, 224 Valkyrie, and probably a bunch I can't even think of, but I think that's a good discussion of popular alternate AR calibers. Hope you liked the discussion. I hope you liked the show. If you do, please consider going to goodshepherdtraining.com and just checking out the website. There's some cool merchandise on there. Also, if you want to contact me, you can contact me at goodshepherdtraining.com. If you want discussions like this all the time, day to day, with a group of like-minded men that don't think it's weird to wake up and talk about weird, obscure calibers, I might want to consider becoming a patron, and also just to support the show. With that, and as a thank you for staying tuned till the end, the tactical tip of the day. Tactical tip of the day, and I got this from a book reading about the Comanches. Talked about starting a fire and gunpowder cloth, and I thought, what a great idea. I have gunpowder, I have cloth, and I've recently been doing quite a few wilderness excursions. So if you shoot a lot, you shoot ARs a lot, 9mm a lot, you probably have a few jacked up rounds. Instead of just throwing them away, you might want to salvage the powder from them. If you reload, you probably spill powder anywhere. You have a bullet puller for those rounds that get messed up. You can just take a pair of pliers and pull the bullet out. I'm not telling you this is safe to do. This is on you. If you hurt yourself, it's your fault. Anyway, you can dump that powder out and put it on a piece of cotton cloth or similar. Be some really heavy duty, like shop towels or something like that. And keep it in a container that will keep it dry. You can use this for tinder. You don't want it all bunched up in one little thing. As I understand it, you kind of want it spread out throughout the cloth, so when you're striking your flint and steel or your ferrocerium rods, which is what I generally go to, the sparks hits it. It doesn't just burst into flames. It hits one of those solitary pieces of gunpowder and will start to light that cloth on fire and will continue to burn to get your tinder started. Anyway, gunpowder cloth, it was a thing historically. If you feel you can safely do that, then you may want to. If you catch your house on fire, that is your fault, friends. That is not my fault. Anyway, if you don't know, modern gunpowder, not black powder, but gunpowder is not an explosive. It's an accelerant. It burns really fast. It does not explode. You don't have to worry about that. But it does burn hot and fast. That's the point of it. Anyway, gunpowder cloth, it was a thing historically, may be a good option for you for whatever reason. It might not be. Might it be dangerous? Yes, but lighter fluid is also dangerous, and you buy that at Walmart. So anyway, consider it. Maybe an option for you, maybe not, but gunpowder cloth. With that, the tactical verse of the day. The book of Psalms. How about the very first psalm? The very first part of the very first psalm. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the paths of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates day and night. He shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that brings forth its fruit in its season, whose leaf also shall not wither. And whatever he does shall prosper. Thanks, men. Have a blessed day.